This is the first time when Stefan presents at DecisionCAMP. But in the last 2 years, I'm reading Stefan's articles, and he is very actively writes about DMN, decision modeling in general. And I have to tell you, he does this masterfully. For instance, he is one of the latest writing. He compares decision modeling and process modeling with dancing of two partners, and describing why DMN should lead BPMN, not vice versa. So I really looking forward to your presentation, Stefan, and it would be about balancing automated and human decisions.
Yes, thank you very much, Jacob. Yeah, what I'm going to talk about in my today's presentation is, in fact, balancing automated and human decisioning, because if we look at decisions, and then I'm talking about operational decisions, mostly in a customer service environment, you see that decision-making in such processes hardly ever is a fully automated straight-through processing. So in most cases, there is always a need to balance human and automatic decisioning. And then the question obviously is, how do you coordinate these two types of decisioning? And yeah, also listening to James, potentially also linking in a third type of decisioning by AI agents or predictive models. And my suggestion there is, I'm working a lot around integration of process, case, and decisions using the standards there, DMN, CMMN, and BPMN. And if I look at processes that or cases that use decision models, one of the pitfalls there is that you scatter, in fact, around the different decisions into a lot of decision models, and put the coordination and the management of all of these models in the hands of processes, where they do not always belong. And that's a little bit what I'm going to talk about today. And I'm also going to use a use case to illustrate that. It's a real life example from the insurance industry. It's about car claim handling. But before starting that, looking at that use case, a first point I would like to make, and probably the audience here already understands that, but I see when I meet customers and organizations that want to engage in DMN or in decision modeling, that they usually put as one of their objectives automation. And one of the things that I want to make clear here is that, to me, from my perspective, the main purpose of decision modeling is not automation. The main purpose is, in fact, getting a shared understanding and transparency about how decisions are to be taken within an organization, within business processes, within customer service, for instance. And that also leads to a first conclusion, that is that decision modeling isn't an IT topic, isn't an IT responsibility. It needs to be owned and also performed by the business. And they need to be at the steering wheel of what's at the core of their business, that's taking good decisions about the services and products they deliver to their customers, to what customers, under which circumstances, etc., etc. So it's, in the first place, about getting consensus on what are really the decision-making and decision-taking policies within our organizations. And then what is very tightly linked to it is, What are the boundaries of what automated decisioning can do, and at what point in time or in which situations do we need human decisioning, either for expertise reasons or for reasons of the decision logic that is, for instance, in a decision model hasn't been worked out in that detail and so completely that it can already be used in an automated way. Or it has, in a lot of cases, also to do with giving authority to certain decision conclusions before they can actually be carried through. And what also needs to be looked at, and that's more in the framework of predictive models, etc., is what are the boundaries of the deterministic decisioning, which, yeah, is mostly what DMN and FEEL is about. With the same type of input, you always get to exactly the same conclusion. And then the decisioning, the type of decisioning taken by, for instance, predictive models or AI agents, which with the same input not always lead, or usually do not lead, to exactly the same conclusion. But the most important point here is that a decision model should always be, and that is what it's about, a translation of an organization's policies based on regulation that can be external or external laws, and on the other hand, internal policies that have been decided on at the highest level of the organization, and that should be translated into a structure of decision management and decision taking that brings together all of the types of decisioning needed to get to decisions, operational decisions in certain processes or in certain circumstances. But obviously, yeah, why are a lot of people thinking that DMN is about automation? It is obviously because DMN offers a lot of tooling and methods that can very easily be automated. Yeah? And the tools like DRDs, decision tables, context, the FEEL language, decision services, business knowledge models, etc. They really empower automation. And in the end, when you have a DMN execution engine, yeah, your decision model is really the automation of it. So you can deploy it and it works. And that is the really nice thing about DMN, that from the simplest logic or the most simple logic to the most complex and extended logics, you can all model it and work it out easily in DMN. DMN also offers a lot of support for complex decisioning tasks like iterating the same logic over multiple business objects, layering extended decisioning into easily understandable and transparent sub-decisions, etc. So it is really a very fantastic tool or method to be working with, and coupled with a good implementation platform, it is really very powerful in getting also automation done in a very good way. The use case I'm going to talk about to illustrate how this is, or how this can be working, and also to illustrate how I think models can be implemented in a much more powerful way, is a car claim handling process. I think everyone driving a car has already faced it either directly or indirectly. But car accidents are part of driving with a car, and whenever that happens, it causes a lot of, or it can cause a lot of damages that can be extensive, both physically and financially. And whenever that happens, most likely insurance companies will be involved in it. And how are they involved in it? Well, whenever an accident takes place, if the drivers are still capable of doing it, they will try to get to an agreement on what just happened. Try also to get on a consensus about it, and writing it down in some kind of way. In Europe, we do it with an accident statement form, which is a standard in Europe. And based upon that form, that is then sent to both insurance companies. If two insurance companies are involved, the insurance company can start off their process. And okay, if we look at car claim handling, but it can also be applied to whatever other type of process or customer service, such as underwriting or granting a loan in a bank, or granting subsidies from a government organization. It's always about the same. In all of these processes, a rather complex decision needs to be taken about different items or different topics that need to be handled. And if we look at the topics in this case, it's first of all about eligibility. Whenever an insurance company receives an accident statement and an accident declaration from one of their customers, well, the first thing they will do is to do a number of checks to see whether that customer was entitled or eligible to send such an accident statement to the insurance company. So did he have a contract? Do we know that customer? What is the status of that contract? Have the premiums been paid? Yes or no? The car that was involved in the accident, was it really in the contract? Was the driver insured, etc.? All reasons, in fact, for also, if one of these questions is answered negatively, to declare that statement or that accident declaration not eligible, and in fact to end the process. Another thing that will need to happen is whenever we go further in the process, to determine the liability. Yeah, was our customer liable for the accident? Was the other party or the counterparty liable for the accident? Or can we talk about the shared liability? And then obviously we get into, once the liability is clear, we need to see what compensation are we going to give to either our customer or a third party in terms of material damage, in terms of bodily injury, which is more complex then. And sometimes you can try to recover damage from third parties. So a lot of different things are involved here. And if we put that, for instance, in a traditional BPMN process, then it would look like this approximately. And here we have three swim lanes. We have the customer, we have the insurance company claims department, and I also added here a lane for the decision engine. Now, but let's first assume that we do not have a decision engine. And if we would not have a decision engine, all of these activities that we see here as decision tasks, they would also be user tasks. And in fact, if we look at this process, this is really a process as it would be executed if everything would be human. And how do we see that? Well, it has a sequence in it. You get a statement. The first thing you want to do is check that eligibility we talked about, because if the customer that sent in the car accident statement is not eligible for assistance by our insurance company, then it is very important to, as quickly as possible, be able to refuse that claim and not to spend more time, resources, or money on it. And also for the customer, it's a good thing because he knows very quickly what the situation will be and whether he will be compensated or not. But let's say in most cases that won't happen. So once you get through that eligibility decision, you will get to a second decision about liability. And then you will get into the decisions about material damage compensations and bodily injury compensations. And once you're out of that, all of these steps, then you can finally close your car claim after obviously implementing these compensations or giving these compensations to the parties that need to receive them. Now, suppose at a certain point in time in this process, you introduce a decision engine. And let's say we would introduce DMN modeling, and we would implement the decisions that we model in DMN in this process. What would happen, and that is a kind of a natural way to go, but probably not the best one, you could then replace these different human tasks by decision tasks. And I'll leave here the bodily injury part as a user task because in most cases you won't be able to automate that part, but the material damage, the liability decision, and the eligibility decision are certainly candidates to be automated by a decision model. And what we see here is if we do that, we end up with 3 different decision models here that are called from these 3 different decision tasks. And if we run through the process, so we get a first task, which is the eligibility decision, which will lead to either one of 3 outputs. Either we say, okay, based on the logic that we defined for eligibility, we decide that this case is eligible, so we will help the customer. Either it is not eligible, and that is decided by the decision model, or it is a situation in which, the decision model itself cannot decide, and we will call the help from a claims handler, for instance, to have a look at it and take that decision. Then we go to the second step, and there we will determine the liability and so on and so on. This is a sequential handling of a process. And in fact, what we do here is we keep that sequence and we implement different decision models. And that is something that is probably not the best thing to do. If we look at what is really at stake here, we need to get to a final settlement decision for that car claim. And if we look at what is involved here, there are 4 topics on which we need to take a decision. There is the topic of eligibility. There is the topic of the liability. There is the topic of the material damage, if there is any. And there is a topic of the bodily injury compensation, if there is bodily injury at that accident. And then if we can have a look at what are the inputs for that. The inputs for eligibility and liability will mostly come from the accident statement report that we got. The material damage can come from a survey done by someone or a survey done based on photographs of the damages on the cars, and then perhaps even with an AI model translated into a compensation. And then the bodily injury, that will be the result probably of a human expertise. And in fact, to get to that final settlement, suppose that we only, that in the eligibility logic, there is a reason to not honor the claim and to declare the claim ineligible, then we can immediately get to that decision. And we don't need do not need either to go through a sequential approach of all the other domains. If we have all the information below here immediately available, then we can immediately get to the final decision. So let's have a closer look at it. So we're talking here about different decisions or sub-decisions: eligibility, liability, material damage, bodily injury damage. We can see where we get the inputs from. For instance, for the liability, that will be based on the circumstances that we see here on the accident statement report. So here, for instance, there are boxes and they can be checked. So for instance, driver A was entering a roundabout, so that's box 6, and the other one had not observed a right of way sign or a red light, which is this box. And in fact, by the boxes that are checked, we can take an undisputable decision about the liability. And if we have a happy flow, that means that there is no bodily injury. That means that we have all information about the eligibility, liability, and material damage immediately. Well, then it is even possible to fully automate end-to-end the entire process, from the accident statement to the payment or compensation of the parties involved. If you end up in a less happy flow, then you will need human expertise on one or more of these topics. But in fact, that is not a sequential thing. It's just about information dependencies we are talking here. And so the only thing that matters is, in fact, that these 4 decisions that need to be taken, that they come to a conclusion. Yeah. And in fact, yeah, all these conclusions, they come together in this end node of the DMN model, which is the car claim settlement decision. It takes in these 4 conclusions of the sub-decisions. And here we see, for instance, that we get, if we get a not eligible result from the car claim eligibility, well, we get to a refusal. If we have an eligible situation and we have a conclusion from the 3 other topics, we get to a settlement. And what we see here also is the decision model will, in fact, this node of the decision model will also decide what it still needs to get to a final decision, because the final decision is either a refusal or a settlement. But there is also here in the middle, there are a number of rows that say we can have missing information on one or more of these items, which means that information needs to be collected somewhere. And the model needs to be rerun with the information that has been gathered. And then we hope that we get to a refusal or a settlement situation. Or it can be based upon the logic that we say, okay, no, we need for each of these topics or one or more of these topics, we need a human decision, because we need human expertise, or we need an authority level because, for instance, the compensation is too high. Yeah? And then you would need someone to look at it and also to feed back the conclusion of his or her decision. Then the model is rerun and gets to a refusal or a settlement. If we handle it like this, and then I reworked, in fact, the handling of our case, not using a BPMN model, because BPMN is mostly sequence driven, and in customer service like a claims handling, you see that CMMN fits better to the challenges that you need to face for modeling them. Here we put, in fact, or I put in such case, the decision model, the DMN model, central in that case model or case plan. We get, at the start, we get a start event, which is a car accident statement that comes in. Based upon all the information that comes in, this is a little bit simplified, obviously. The car claim settlement decision, which is a decision task, is executed. And if it ends into something like missing information or the need for human decisions on one of the topics here, these tasks that are on the left-hand side, which are human tasks or user tasks, will need to be executed. And as soon as one or more of them has been executed, we re-execute, in fact, the decision model, and we keep on doing that until the decision model is satisfied with all the inputs and can get to either a refusal or a settlement of the car claim. And then we can end, in fact, this case or this process or this customer service. So what that means is that we use, in fact, the decision, or that we build a case management or a case model in which the DMN decision is central, and we have decisioning centricity built into that case. So what you do, in fact, is see your DMN model as some kind of a spider in the web, which reacts to all the events, and this is adding when information is added, in fact, to the case, and which will rerun the case with new information, with updated information, as long as it takes to get finally to the final conclusion, which is a refusal or a settlement. And that allows, in fact, to also build an integrated decision model which reflects entirely end-to-end what the organization expects as the handling of a car claim, following all the regulations, all the policies to be followed, etc. And the decision model itself will orchestrate both the deterministic logic parts, the AI parts, and the human decisioning parts to a balanced end-to-end decision. And based upon my experience, this is something that is quite powerful and that also avoids scattering parts of your decision logic around a process model or a case model. And here you bring it all together based on decision requirements that eventually will lead to a final conclusion on your case in this matter. Okay. So this is, in fact, what I wanted to show you, and I also left enough time to discuss about this because I really also look forward to your reaction to such type of decisioning centricity. And as Jacob has told in the beginning, I've got a blog on the internet called Tripod for Operational Excellence, in which I regularly post articles about these going together of process, case, and decision management using CMMN, DMN, and BPMN. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Stefan. Very interesting, especially using decision modeling for orchestration. That's something what we can see a lot of times. It's not only BP, BPM, but also DMN used for orchestration. And also it replaces such things as AWS steps functions. Then they have special orchestration language, but it's too complicated for business people. So this is, at least it's very interesting direction. And do we have questions from audience? You can just unmute and talk.
Just to provide a question. So you mentioned your conclusion is that the DMN orchestrates the decision, and the DMN orchestrate the process or what's going on, I guess. That baffles me a little bit, because fundamentally what you just presented is that the case orchestrates the case, not the decision. The decision is just a switching mechanism, given that it's stateless. So what you're really showing is CMMN orchestration of the decision as opposed to BPMN orchestration, which I agree, and it's certainly a different method, and it's a good method. A question to you though is, how do you evaluate this in terms of resource usage? So in your BPMN model, you would stop right away as soon as eligibility was not there, and you wouldn't use any human or automated resource, where in this case here, you will be continuing more if you have your decision that's tackling all this. So have you looked at this a bit?
Yeah. And it's not, so it works the same as in BPMN. So, I mean, content-wise. So if the eligibility logic says that there is no eligibility, the case will be refused, because that is a situation in which the other parts of the decision, like liability, etc., they may have produced the result if the input data is available, and they may have even led to a conclusion that human expertise is needed. But in the decision table underneath the endnote, there, as soon as we have an ineligible situation, it will lead to an end result, which is refusal. Yeah. I hope that's clear.
Yeah, no, it is. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. More questions, please? Okay. Stefan, can you show your orchestration slide with this table with policy, hit policy C a little bit up? Yes, this one. Yeah. Can you make it larger, or so we can see?
Yeah.
Yes, I just noticed that probably this table could be essentially simplified or optimized. I thought Jan, once Jan would tell you about this. It's a hit policy C, and one thing what a little bit annoys immediately, just it works, I understand, but you have to mention every time you already had, for example, misinformation, and then you say not misinformation. So if you organize it differently, you probably don't need this not. So this is just, it's not one of this.
Yeah, but the reason why I put in this hit policy is because here you have 4 different types of human decisions possible.
Yes.
And it can be whatever. So it can be, I need human expertise for the liability and for the bodily injury. And for instance, for I don't know, another one, I have a missing information. So you get, in fact,
accumulation,
multiple, you can get a list of answers here instead of only one conclusion. Yeah.
Yes, this is fine, but your default settlement, repeating this a little bit strange. Let's talk to other people. If you guys look at this, I'm sure maybe tomorrow somebody can offer a little bit more clear table. it's not like it's nothing wrong with this, but it's still it's example because this is example of your orchestration logic in a way,
Yeah.
right? So this is.
But I'm
it
always
should
looking
be.
forward to suggestions to make things better and more efficient.
And
So,
by the way,
yeah.
can you do interruption just after you go to level to rule 10 only if previous rules were not executed. But anyway,
so
let's see.
Jacob,
Yeah,
the
what do you think?
reason for that is that it's not the car claim settlement decision that he's doing. What he's doing is the next action to do.
Yeah, that's it.
So the decision is not the car settlement. If it was the car settlement, it would look like what it was in the previous structure. So this is not deciding about the car settlement, it's deciding about what next action needs to take place.
Yeah, in fact, it is.
So,
In the case of a refusal or a settlement, it leads to these milestones, and then that leads to an end. In the other cases, as long as we don't have events leading to refusal or settlement, we have one or more of these actions that need to be performed.
Yes, it's just probably you can see it does not sit well, this example with from first look, but if you look on previous diagram, this is where orchestration goes on previous slide, diagram on previous slide. And I just want to suggest something. We're running on DM community challenges. If you can formulate this car claim settlement as a challenge, we will publish this and let's see how different people would implement this. And
that would be nice.
And we will use your implementation as a first, put yourself in position that other people can criticize. That's what you actually do, and this is really good. Marvin, go ahead.
Yeah.
Marvin, you raised hand.
I think that Jan was first, but if you allow me, Jan.
Yeah, just repeating what Dennis was saying, this is indeed the next best action or next action table.
Yeah, it is,
which is fine as long as you know it. But in general, it's a little dangerous to confuse action statements with declarative decision logic. What DMN is supposed to model. Of course, it will work, but it's a little mind-boggling to do two things at the same time: the declarative knowledge and then the procedural logic of how to organize the inputs and the missing information and so on. That's the only thing which is coming together here. But it's a nice solution. It will definitely work, of course.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Marvin, go ahead.
Well, less on the content, but more on the message. I fully agree with repeating over and over the importance of looking at the decision. And I think the story Stefaan tells us is one that has to be repeated many times, because as we see, we know a lot about DMN, we know a lot about decision tables, and we tend to have deep discussions about how they should be modeled and executed. But there is a step before, and that's making people understand what the power of focusing on decisions is. Well, James started with the standard introduction on how to position it, but I think that with more examples, it becomes clear that we can really solve problems, and maybe not only within commercial organizations, but that's my own experience, also within government organizations, because there you have, to tell the story 1,000 times before you get feet on the ground and you get support from people in the business that start looking differently at their sequence, at their processes, because they're stuck to that, they're used to that. That's the way they think, and start looking at it differently. And stories like this really help. So my compliments for that.
Thank you.
Okay, more questions, please. Okay, if there are no questions, let me stop recording. And